So welcome everyone. I'm so excited today to have my dear friend and collaborator, Sebastian Mejia. I'm pronouncing that correctly, right, Mejia?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Here with us today, all the way from Santiago de Chile, all the way down in the tip, not the full tip, but all the way down in South America on the other side of the world right now. Seb and I first met 17 years ago in
Wow,
2004. Yeah. I was doing the math there. In a sophomore photo critique course. And it was a joy, that class. We just, like Seb especially, was so advanced for his age and just really raised the level of critique. A number of students, including Seb, have been very successful out of that class. And so Seb and I have stayed in contact over all of these years because we formed such a great bond. And it's one of the joys of teaching, is to be able to become friends, and like I said, collaborator with somebody that I first met, in a different situation. I'm certainly not Seb's teacher anymore. I learned as much from him, if not more. And so just really, really, really honored and happy that I can share a little bit of Seb with you today. So let me give you a little bit about Sebastian. He was born in Peru, raised in Colombia, came up to New York for his undergraduate studies at School of Visual Arts, and now he lives in Santiago de Chile. He is both a photographer and a professor. He teaches at the Universidad Finis Terrae and the Universidad Diego Portales. He published his first book, Panorama, in 2015. His work has been showcased in numerous exhibitions in Chile and abroad, including the Photographers Gallery in London, which is a very important establishment. And you can read, as I've written in both the Instagram and also online, of a number of different institutions. And so with that, I give you my dear friend, Sebastian Mejia.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for your kind words, and thank you all for joining me here. It's great to have an opportunity to share my work, and it's one of those things of the crazy pandemic that all of these options opened up to be able to participate and collaborate with people from afar. So I think photography is one of the things that can work through this format. It's some art, like I teach in an art school, and when it comes to painting and sculpture, it doesn't really translate to a virtual format. But I think photography is something that we can advance and grow through these meetings, through these virtual meetings. So I want to say that it's first, make the most of your time in school. I think it's such a great opportunity to be able to study photography. Make the most out of your time with Eric as well. He was a teacher that very marked me, and I think he has an ability to push students without being aggressive. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but he manages in a very kind way to kind of like push you forward, and it's a very good quality. So it passes so fast, the time in school, that really try and make the most of it. And with that said, I want to talk about my presentation today. I'm going to show you some work that that is part of the book that I published a few years ago. And the way I'm going to show it is as a dialogue. with the history of photography. I don't know, I've had to do more than one presentation, but I still have problems talking about my work, about my work only. So I devised this way of presenting my work as a dialogue with my artistic influences and references, and it's a good way to just to show the types of connections I made. That doesn't mean that I created the work directly in response to a particular photographer, but it was more that later on I started to see these connections in my work, with connected to different photographers from different times. So I'm going to show you a bit of a history of photography as well. I picked out a few photographers that have really influenced my work. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, can everybody see me sharing the screen? Is that working okay? Okay, so this is the cover of the book that I published back in 2015. Time passes so fast. I'm working on my second book now, and at least for me, the book format worked very well, because I worked in a very serial manner. So having one picture by itself, I think, loses a lot of the initial intention that's part of all of the investigation. So the title of the book is Panorama, and it alludes to a landscape. That would be definitely my line of work, but a landscape that's constructed of different pieces. So I work with the landscape, but it's mainly in an urban setting. And because of the nature of the city, I have to focus on small fragments. So it's through the accumulation of these fragments that the idea of a particular landscape comes through, or is communicated. This first image, I have been very fortunate that it has traveled a lot. It's had a very good reception. It's a gas station that's downtown here, and that was constructed about 30 years ago, and it respected the palm tree and was built around, So that's the common theme that I work through Panorama. It's the interaction of the natural world with the man-made world, and mainly through these specific observations. They are landscapes, but at the same time they are photographs of things in the way that I photograph them, like centered and one at a time. So here we start our journey through the history of photography. And this was my first influence, William Henry Fox Talbot. And I keep going back to Fox Talbot because I think the way of making photography with such little materials, these were some of the first photographs ever made in which the plant itself is working as as a negative or as part of the photograph itself. This is no camera, so it's a photogram. I bet you all know this by now, but I have to explain. So what I rescue of Fox Talbot, what I admire about his work, is just the sense of marvel in nature, and this like semi-scientific spirit of investigating and trying to find an image through different mediums, be it the photogram or developing a camera to photograph this type of things. But it still follows what I showed in the first image, on the cover image of my book. That is like this one thing, you know, it's photograph of one thing whole. It's centered in the image. And this is once he started developing his camera. So this is no longer a photogram, this is a photograph, but always with a negative. And these photographs that have the black background are my photographs. This is the first photo in the book. This is the first photo in Panorama. And it's acts as a kind of introduction into a scenery. So this is landscape. This is the natural world, but in fact, it's a botanical garden. So it talks about this idea of the garden as a space where nature is very much controlled and pruned. And what I like about this specific plant is that it has this kind of timeless quality to it. It's kind of a prehistoric plant in which you don't really understand the scale, or it's just, I don't know, it's really caught my eye. This is 4x5 negative. Everything that you're going to see is all analog. It's made in film with a large format camera, medium format, 6x7, and 35 millimeter. So with each camera, I think I have a different way of working. The 35 is just it's kind of like I'm taking notes with it. Sometimes I go back to that same location. Sometimes just that quick photograph is better than a more formal one. The photographs with a medium format camera still follows that rectangle, and I think it's once I start to discover a part, especially a part of town that I see photographic possibilities, I go with a medium format and photograph. And then once I have pinpointed a specific subject that I want to investigate, or a part of town that I know I'm going to get something, I go back with my large format, because you know it's so big, and the backpack and the tripod, that it's not the best idea to just go wandering around with that. Even though I do it a lot, it's heavy. So I continue with this. We are still in the 19th century, and this is Francis Frith, one of my favorite landscape photographers. And this is an example, you know, of a grand view. What you see here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, is a person just sitting down. That works as a method of scale, of showing the scale of the landscape. And, you know, this is part of a, you know, very romantic view of photography, and talking about the sublime, the grandeur of the land, of the landscape. and how small we human beings are compared to it. So I try to apply this spirit to my photographs, and they are not like exotic, faraway places. They are mainly on the in the city or on the fringes. So this is just outside Santiago de Chile. It's a park that's by the mountains, and I'm going to show you a zoom in of what the photograph is really about. So if you can see, there's a couple that was sitting. There's a river that runs below, so they were having a romantic evening, and I was walking with my large format camera, and I saw them. So this is I'm photographing from another mountain, and a river runs through. So we're far away, and I set up the camera. And the nature of the large format camera is not like a hostile. It's not like I'm going to paparazzi you. It's so they saw me take the photograph, and they posed in a very relaxed way. And I took the picture. Luckily, it came out all right, because I still screw up a lot of negatives often. And from afar, I was like, okay, ciao, bye. And they were like, bye, bye. And I never really made close contact with them. And I took this portrait of them in this natural scenery. So again, I go back to the landscape, and always like the presence of man, even if it's directly or indirectly. Another great 19th century photographer, Carleton Watkins. And this is, I don't know if you can see with the resolution of the web, but there is a person here. So it's again using the camera as a tool to photograph the wonders of the natural world. So in that, and it has to do a lot with the time he was photographing. No? For the 19th century, this whole part of Yosemite was like, it was wild, and it was something that the people wanted to see, because they didn't have access to these places, were very limited. So I try to apply that to a very common everyday landscape, which is, you know, this type of how do you call it? It's not a mall, because it's not a mall. It's just like a commercial space that was made very informally, and it's filled with clothing stores. So I saw this one day walking, but it's packed. It was when the stores are open, it's just full of information. So what I did is I returned one day very early, and I asked permission to the people in charge if I could photograph this palm tree that interests me, because there is a play of different time scales. You know, the palm tree was there long before all of this was constructed. So even though I'm thinking very about space very much, maybe a priority, the composition of space, the way space is constructed, and the way I am constructing within the frame. The notion of time is also very present. Even though I'm not photographing, you know, the decisive moment, or it's much of a slower rhythm, but time is very important. This is another Carleton Watkins photograph, and it's even you know, even 19th century, these dialogues were very present. I mean, the nature and the man-made world. And this is one of the main streets of the city of Santiago, where there is a lot of different types of business here. It used to be a very traditional street, but now it's just packed with commercial activity. So it's these types of places that I look for, that are still kind of like in transition, and this is where I find this type of material that's these kind of how do you say it, like sprouts of different time, of a different age, or so this is a tree with a big nest on it. Sorry. And you know, also the human is always present, as a measure of scale, as a type of accident that I can't avoid, but it's always there. Still 19th century, Mark Ferrez is a Brazilian photographer that documented the Rio de Janeiro region, obviously before this monstrous city came about. And I imagine the experience of seeing these photographs in the 19th century, especially seeing these in Europe, where the landscape is so different. And you know, this is where all the ideas of exotic places came from. So I take that and I try to apply it to the contemporary Caribbean landscape. This is in Colombia, in a beach called Santa Marta. And now that type of landscape is inevitably linked with industry, be it the tourist industry or the mining industry. All of these ships that you see here are coming to get coal from a mine nearby. And the idea of this photograph was that it's early in the morning and the sun was just coming up, and these two sunbathers are just like, you know, making the most out of their spot. We're entering the 20th century now, and this is a great photographer from Peru. Martin CHAMBI photographed in the region of Cusco, and that's a region that has a lot of historical importance. This is him posing. It's a self-portrait, and below is Machu Picchu, the ruins of Machu Picchu. These are some of the first photographs of this place that has been photographed, you know, millions and millions of times now. And this is a detail of Inca constructions. This rock is famous. It's called the Rock of 12 Angles. So it has like all of these 12 little angles. You can see the ingenuity in building with these materials. And I try to work with these materials as well, because also I go back to the idea of time scales. And I try to, by framing, try to create these dialogues of objects that through chance end up together, like this rock with this, it's sort of a van that you see a lot here in Santiago. So in a way, the rock is is from a different age, you know, a geological age, and this van here is a way of putting a date on the photograph. I can tell you pretty much what year that model is, about 2010, 2012, around there. Edward S. Curtis, famous American photographer, photographing the native people that were disappearing. So he's known for mostly this type of work, but what I am interested in this work that I discovered of him that has more to do with an anthropological point of view, which was him veering away from these romantic views of the Native Americans and just focusing on a very scientific way and a very direct way on their dwellings and their objects. And that's the point of view that I want to apply to my photographs. It's kind of, I think the camera works well with this scientific language, with this documentary language that wants to just register the shape of our dwellings nowadays. This is also in Colombia, and this house I photographed about 8 years ago, and I returned to rephotograph it, and they had remodeled it and changed it all around because it's just it was such a weird pastiche of styles. You know, they have like this kind of like traditional Latin American house, but with these box like, you know, it's kind of like a Lego house. And the sign here says it's for sale. This is also Edward S. Curtis photographing mortuary rituals. And what I like about this is also just that the photograph transforms it also into a sculptural observation. And I try to translate that also to my urban walks. It's in my walks around the city that I get very inspired to photograph. So I observe these types of things that have to do very much with Latin American idiocy, like type of thinking, idiosincrasia in Spanish, the Latin American way that has to do with seeing the city more informally, like the solutions that are made are not very, that have to do with like urban planning. It's just more like, okay, let's solve this for now and see what we do later. Another great 20th century photographer, Atget, that photographed the streets of Paris, also in a time of major changes. So I try to take this point of view of Atget in the sense that it's these apparently empty views where there is not much happening, but what that does is it gives importance to other things. The fact that there is nothing happening here, I think, forces the eye to look at the scene in a different way and analyze it, and analyze things that otherwise you wouldn't. So these photographs aren't about a story that takes place here, but more about as I was saying before, the dialogue of different architectural times, architectural styles, and it just makes you, I think it raises more questions of what it is really that you're seeing, or why should I dedicate my time to seeing this. So the idea of this is the 4x5 gives you such amount of detail and description that it forces you also to navigate the frame and see the different textures and the passing of time and the working of light in a very still situation. Karl BLOSSFELDT, the German photographer that I think if I'm not wrong, he started photographing because he was a botanical illustration teacher and needed the photographs as a way to register these natural specimens. And so this is his book that was published in the 1920s, Art Forms in Nature, which is an amazing book that's still being republished. And it consists of these botanical specimens on this white background, but seen with such detail that it really transforms them into sculptural objects as well. So I try to translate that to the city, and since I can't, since I don't have access to such a big background, what I try to do is use the typical overcast Santiago sky, which is pretty much all of winter. It's overcast here. And I try to do that to separate as much these specimens, and also I go back. I first saw this in a parking lot and it was packed. This is a supermarket parking lot, and it was full of cars and all type of noise. So I returned Sunday morning and try to capture it in a way that it stood out the most. The idea is to make these specimens the protagonists of the photographs, even though a photograph, a documentary photograph of this scene will inevitably include all of this other information of context that will, in the end, I think inform the photograph. And by the end of the book, Panorama, I focus on this specific topic, that are the urban palm trees of Santiago de Chile. I mainly look for palm trees that weren't put there for like landscape urbanism reasons, that were like like completely planned, a row of palm trees and things like that, but mostly palm trees that were planted there when the city wasn't urbanized there yet. I'm talking about 70, 100 years ago, these parts of the city were all rural areas. So they had these big trees, and as the city grew, most of these trees and most of this landscape disappeared, but the Chilean people have a particular fondness for the palm tree, so many of these palm trees survived. This palm tree was falling. So this line right here is a cable that's tied to the palm tree, and then the other side tied to a really big rock that was like holding it up. Another big influence in my work has been the photographs of August Sander, German photographer as well, who had a very ambitious project that was try to make a portrait of the current social society. So what he did was he tried to apply the same point of view to all sorts of people that work different trades, be it the judge or the mechanic or the person that works in a pastry shop, or they are all photographed pretty much the same way, which is, you know, centered with this with a little bit of information of context, and it's in the accumulation of these portraits that you get the idea of the society of the time. And this is one of my few portraits. These were a group of bathers that I encountered in the south of Chile in a lake. And what I liked about them was, again, this timeless quality to them. That photographed in black and white, how do you say, made the most of that, or excelled that, or showed it more. We continue with Walker Evans, who I think is the photographer that I keep going back to the most. And his use of the documentary style photography, which is just like using the camera in the most direct way possible, trying to photograph things in a way in which you are not really noticing the photographer's ability by composing or catching the right moment, but mostly just like noticing the things themselves. It's like the subject has the power of the photograph. I don't know if I made myself clear there. And I go back to this street that I have showed you a couple of times before. That's one of the main streets of Santiago. And I try to focus on these just odd constructions that I think will disappear very soon, just because I don't know how much longer that construction will hold. Chile being a country with a lot of earthquakes, architecture has to be very strong. You know, construction has to be very strong. Another big influence, Harry Callahan. I think I say that about every photographer I show. But what I admire about Harry Callahan is his way of translating, of reducing things to the minimum. You know, you can't do a simpler photograph than this. It's just borderlines, a photograph of nothing. But he does it in such an elegant way. And this picture I included, it's not a famous Harry Callahan shot. I included it because I saw this in a book and I was like, oh, a tree with light, that's odd. But I read the caption and it was titled Cusco, you know, Peru, mid 20th century. And I thought it was pretty amazing that he traveled so far in this land where there's so much things to photograph, especially at that time. And and he was marveled by like this just little slab of light that's hitting this eucalyptus. And I think that's kind of mystic quality to it, a spiritual aspect to photography. So I think that's something that I look for in my walks around the city, just these little instances of magic. It could be made by light or by a combination of different factors. And here, what happened was that this was a lamp that was turned on just at the right time. It was kind of like magic hour. It wasn't day, but it wasn't night yet. So when I photographed it, the light kind of disappears. Manuel Alvarez Bravo is a Mexican documentary photographer who I think was very successful in mixing like the documentary language with this more lyric, with this more poetic point of view. So I try to rescue that and just apply it to, I don't know, as common a thing as you can get. Is just a patch of dirt. Sergio Larraín is a photographer from Chile who worked mainly in the 60s here. This is in Valparaíso. That's a city close to here, and it's a port. And this was one of his first photographs that I think it was from 1956 that I thought for his time was so odd to see, because it's just I don't know, an odd thing to notice at that time. You don't see many photographers photographing little corners of grass, just wild grass. And another influence, I think there should have been one of my photographs here. I skipped it. My apologies. So advancing in the 20th century, after, you know, the 50s, 60s, things happen to photography that the cameras end up in the hands of artists that are not photographers. And things like this happen, like this book called 26 Gasoline Stations by Ed Ruscha, in which he just wants to use the photograph in the kind of like the dumbest way possible and photograph 26 gasoline stations. Not very careful in making them beautiful, but just in getting all getting all 26 in the frame. And I think at the time, you know, it was considered trash. Now it's a collectible book, and photographers have adopted that spirit of a more playful way of using photography. For me, Ed Ruscha is a big influence, and not, how to say it. I think photographers, when they get too serious, they get kind of like too stiff. So it's good to, I don't know, shake it up a bit and try new ways to abord or to view your subject. So going back to palm trees, this was a mall. This is a big mall that's close to my house. And these are palm trees that were introduced, what I say, more for landscaping reasons. But still, it's just like it creates these little gardens that are occupied by people that are temporarily sleeping here. So it's very much about the use of landscape that wasn't intended to originally. And Richard Long is another artist that uses photography just to document his performances that have to do with walking. So this photograph that we're seeing here is called A Line Made by Walking. What he did was he just walked back and forth, I don't know how many times, until he started drawing on the land. And what remains is the photograph. So the photograph, with time, gained this this importance as an object as well, of just the purpose of serving, just documenting gesture or performance or a sculpture or a temporary sculpture, something that really caught my eye. So this is a type of self-portrait. These are my footprints on the grass. And this is the 70s. New Topographics was an amazing show. Well, I never saw the show, but I have access to the book. But the selection of landscape photographers is amazing. Mainly, yes, Robert Adams, who photographed the American West, revisiting these places that were photographed by these 19th century photographers as these grand landscapes, but just viewing them as how we are occupying them recently. It has to do with the suburbs, and has to do with these more average or more like not that exciting places, but he still manages to see them in such a beautiful way. And this is my homage to Robert Adams. I don't know if you can see well, but this is a pole here, and there is a cable that runs across. So in the print, it looks like the cloud was suspended on this cable here, and it's just I don't know, common semi-rural scene where sometimes you just find inspiration. You just find something that is worth photographing. This is one of the last references. BERND and HILLA BECHER were a German couple who photographed industrial architecture from the 20th century at a time in Europe where all of this architecture was disappearing because economies of those countries were changing, and they decided to photograph it very much like Karl BLOSSFELDT, like August Sander, just like Walker Evans, just centering and trying not to over dramatize the subject, but just show it in the clearest way possible. So it's in the repetition of this subject that you start to understand what they're trying to do. And that's also what I wanted to create with the palm trees. It's in the repetition that these different traits of each palm tree shine or come about. The light itself is not that showy or that flashy. It's just there to illuminate as much as possible without losing information in the shadows or on the highlights. And you see the angles also aren't very present. It's just trying to photograph it as straight on, and it's a series of decisions to try and empower the most the subject, which is the palm tree. So you see, this is a stop sign right here, just so that you get the idea of scale. And this is the last inspiration. First color photograph we see. Gabriel Orozco is also an artist. He's more known as a sculptor who uses photography to document these sculptural observations he sees around. This photograph is called Breath on a Piano. So it's him documenting his breath on the surface right before it disappears. Sculptural experiments. And this is another type of intervention on the land. You can see my interventions are very discreet, but it's a circle I made on the grass, which lasts, I don't know, I think just a few seconds. The grass automatically just goes back to the original position. And that is my presentation for today.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. What's so wonderful about your presentation, I had no idea how you were going to present your work, but it totally reiterates what we teach here as far as, understanding that making photographs, making art is a conversation with the past, it's a conversation with other artists, contemporary artists as well. And it's such a wonderful way for you to go and present your work and reiterate some of the lessons from here. I'm wondering, does anybody in the audience have questions for Sebastian? jump on in.
I think that being a young photographer is tough. Handling the historic load. It's like you start a project and then you go and show it to someone. It's like, oh, but this guy already did this 40 years ago. And it's like, nowadays, who cares? What you can do is just try and incorporate different influences and to create your own voice. It's try and make the most of it.
I want to do a little personal plug. Ed Ruscha's 26 Gasoline Stations, I actually recently purchased one of those books because I am making a video and book project in direct reference to that, but it's 26 Wawas. I don't know if you know what Wawas are, Seb. They are, they are convenience stores. They're convenience stores that are specifically in southeastern Pennsylvania. And so everybody's smiling here because there's either Wawa's or there's Sheetz is another brand. And it's kind of the people actually like feel strongly about their brand. And so I'm making, I've captured video in these 26 Wawas marching along what's known as the Lincoln Highway, which goes from, which was a now defunct, but a highway that went across the United States. And so yeah, we're so simpatico. I had to do this too, because as you're talking about KARL BLOSSFELDT, I'm looking at this right across my view in my dining room here in Lancaster. This is a KARL BLOSSFELDT print. And so
wow.
what we did at a certain point was the books were published in 1928-29 as photogravures. And so it's an intaglio process, and they're beautiful. And so people started pulling the books apart and selling the prints individually, which is horrible, but also there are a lot of books, so it's okay. So this costs like $125, and you can actually go online and buy yourself a KARL BLOSSFELDT print this size. They're so stunning. There's such lessons in form, right? And he was not thinking about art. He was thinking about science when he made the photographs. But you and me, Seb, you know, come on. Gabriel Orozco, I want to mention that if anybody who's interested in that work, there's a wonderful interview of him on Art 21, public broadcasting series of artists. And if you just go Gabriel Orozco, Art 21, you'll find him actually going out and making photographs. So he's walking around, I believe it's Mexico City, and you get to see his process, and he just talks about his thought process. It's just amazing. So those are just some of my observations and not questions for you, Seb. But do we have some questions, please? Don't be shy.
Constructive criticism is also welcome.
It's not much of a question, but I just wanted to say I really enjoyed seeing like your inspirations and your influences and how you've incorporated that into your own work in like a different light. So I really commend you on that.
Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you very much. Well, as I said, I didn't create the work specifically thinking of these authors, but it was more that later on I started making these connections, and in the end, how Eric said, it's all a dialogue with art history.
Yes, and that's what we teach very much so in for senior thesis. And so the seniors, when they're working with Professor Johansson here, in the fall, they do a lot of research. And it's not just researching photographers, but any cultural output. You know, it could also be anthropologists or psychologists or musicians, et cetera. And so it's very much a core of what we think is a way to think about conceptualizing with the medium.
I'm just gonna piggyback on Kennedy's observation. First, Sebastian, thank you for your talk. Thanks for coming. I really loved it. I wrote down at least 19 artists that you referenced. And I didn't count all the new objectivity people, so there's probably even more than that. One thing I really appreciated was, as a model for our students, I love the way you are connecting with artists that at the surface level, one may not think looks anything like your work. And I also appreciated that you were able to articulate, here's the thing about this work that I'm connecting with. And that's a challenge for students sometimes. You can often say, I see a connection to this artist, but trying to formulate or articulate what that connection is in your work is more challenging. So I really enjoyed hearing you talk about a very diverse range of images. I'm going to just give a little hint to my students that you guys have statements you're writing now that goes with your personal projects, and this is one of the things you're doing. So Sebastian's a great model for that.
I'm glad it helps. Thank you, David, for your comments. Yes, sometimes it's a specific technical thing that I relate to. Sometimes it's a more formal thing. But sometimes I refer to it, it's just in spirit. It's something that artist evokes, or it's just something that you can put your finger on it specifically that I rescue. And it's just a good exercise to try and dig and try to find out what it is about an artist that you find interesting.
I love your use of the word rescue when you talk about, you know,
Maybe it's a translation.
No, but your choice of words is very specific. It's not. I just love the idea that you are kind of saving it from history in a way and reinvigorating it through your own practice. And so I think it's a really beautiful way of thinking about it, and an excellent word. How long do palm trees, what's their lifespan?
I've spotted palm trees here that have more than 100 years. So if they're healthy, they can keep going more. But in an urban setting, those palm trees that I saw, I don't know how much longer they're going to last. And many of them that I photographed for this series, some of them are not there anymore. Others have no leaves, so it's just like one stick that remains. And I'm thinking of a re-photographing project. Like it's gonna be time soon.
Nice.
This isn't really a question, but I wanted to say that I really like the pictures of the one where the clouds are kind of like resting on the wire, and then the specific one of the really big palm tree with the tiny stop sign next to it. I really like that one too because the scale is just astonishing.
Thank you for saying that, Rachel, because I thought when I showed that picture of the cloud, I don't know, sometimes I think that showing my work to a younger audience is a challenge because you guys are used to seeing so many photographs a day that competing with your attention span is hard. So I thought, oh man, they're gonna find this photograph so boring. But thank you for saying that, Rachel.
Not our students, they're sophisticated. So Kennedy wrote in the chat that she loves that photograph, and I do too. And it actually has a bit of a Orozco in it, in a way. Observation, right? It, actually kind of made me think a little bit about Vic Muniz as well.
Great.
Yeah. Let's see what else is in the chat here. Oh, people are arguing about what's better, Wawa or Sheets.
Controversy.
Yes, I think I've stirred the pot.
Wawa in Chile is baby. They call the babies wawas. And I think it's because of wow, wow, you know, they cry wawas.
Wawa references a bird, and it was a Native American name for the bird. And so there's actually a bird, I think it's a goose, is in the logo. But yeah, we go Wawa too.
I'm just going to start calling it the baby gas station. That's it. It's not Walmart.
You sound like a sheets person there.
Because I'm Western PA. Western PA is more sheets. And
Right, that's the thing. It's like if the cutoff is around Lancaster, and that was one of the things that interested me as well. It's like the
So
thing.
you're neutral?
Well, no, well, I'm not neutral because I never go west. I'm a Wawa person.
if you go on the western side of Lancaster, there's a lot of sheets, and if you go to the eastern side, there's like a couple Wawas.
They just start around there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Such odd names, both of them. I think they're so odd.
Well, Sheets, I think, is a surname. I think it's somebody's actual name. That.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Sheetz. Yeah. So, Seb, David, you wanted to say something?
Well, I was gonna make an observation / question about subject matter, because there's a lot of really interesting things about the way you talk about. Okay, I'll back up for a second. I think the work that you showed, and often the artists that you referenced, are representing a kind of deadpan aesthetic, right? A kind of an objectivity in terms of the frame and the use of the overcast Chilean sky or Colombian sky, and the subject being consistent. So when you put up the first two images, I was thinking Becher's, and then we got to Becher's eventually. So it was like a perfect kind of way to end the talk. What I wondered was, I thought the way you articulated, when you're forced to look at an image that is, as you said, an empty frame or empty view, I think was your word, like a view that there's nothing particularly exotic or decisive in the image, it does force us to like reconsider, why is he showing me this? And why is he pointing to this? Why is he pointing to this from this vantage point, in this light, in this framing? And I just want to kind of thank you for like being transparent about the things you're thinking about when you're making those choices. It did make me think a little bit about palm trees more specifically. And so I do like that the conversation turned to like, how old do palm trees get? Can palm trees reproduce when they're isolated from other palm trees by urban development? So I started thinking about the specific object, but then also I think larger themes like cultural and natural confluences, where they come into contact and their ironies and the built environment. So anyway, it's interesting, just kind of noting to the students that the subject matter is important and it's not important. Like it both is the subject, but it's not the subject. There are things about the relationship to the things around the trees, and there are things about the relationship to the frame and the relationship to the history of photography. Like they're all those things as the subject of the pictures. So it's really kind of a great project to look at, to think critically about what photography can be. So again, thank you.
Yeah, I told you.
Yes, that's very good comment, because I think that that's when relationships are most important in the way that photograph is going to relate to the next and to the previous. And that's why a photographic series, a body of work, a book or a slideshow is like the way to present your work, because it's you're telling a story, even if it's not chronological. You're telling you're giving us a set of clues, and especially with these empty views, it's very important how you're going to relate those views to each other, to other elements, and that's when you really start to communicate.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank you so much, Seb. I'm going to turn off the recording. This is going to end up on YouTube, folks. If you want to watch again all those references, right? I think that very important that you take another look at some point of all the things that Seb talks about in the way that he talks about it. But first, let's thank Sebastian for being here. Yay!
Thank you.
I love that clapping. It's the first time I see it online. Like it.
Don't
Thanks.
anyone go anywhere. Bye-bye, YouTube world. Everybody else stay.